very much. Okay. This evening's program, our other speaker is coming. She's from the Ukraine. She's been delayed by a war or something like that, I think. But both of them are former students of mine. Misha Onyanovic is the best. He was the most brilliant student that I ever had. He was also the star basketball player on our team when
NAIA. 1993.
HPU, believe it or not, was the champion basketball team in the nation in that league. And he was the champion player on the team. And then he happened to take my class too. So we've been very, very close friends. He's from Serbia. And just in time, Elizabeth. Yes, good. And the other guest here is Elizabeth Stolna. Please come up and sit right here. Yeah. Elizabeth is from Ukraine. Misha is from Serbia. She was the superstar student just a couple years ago, and as Carrie is now, and Philip, but also she was the head of our entrepreneur club, Reason Club. Yeah. Okay, so won't you welcome Elizabeth Stolna from Ukraine?
Yeah.
It's easier to hear.
Okay, now you can see me. Hi, I wasn't expecting that much people. That's really nice to see that you want to learn more about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. Interesting fact, I'm not just Ukrainian, I'm half Ukrainian, half Russian. And it's just like a 50-50 split in my family, and half actually lives in Russia and only speaks Russian. So I can talk from the perspective of both countries. So I immigrated to Hawaii about 4 years ago. Well, not immigrated, but moved for college. And I grew up mostly in Ukraine, but I was born in the United States. And then I lived for a few years in Russia, Yekaterinburg and Moscow. Yeah, and my family is still in Ukraine, and a lot of friends, and also in Russia. So I was very closely checking what was happening there. And I actually prepared some presentation, but I don't think I'll be able to show you. So if you want to see any visuals that I have, I'll be happy to just pass it by. Oh, that's right, because my microphone is only for recording camera. Yeah, I was just saying that I'm half Ukrainian, half Russian, and it will be very interesting for me to give you perspective from both sides and also tell you what's happening from the first source, because I hear it from my family every day. So my presentation was supposed and is still supposed to be called The War in Ukraine and the Clonery of the Soviet Mindset and the Terrible Consequence of the Soviet Mindset. And I wasn't planning to start my presentation with the quote. So a Russian peasant pleads to God for aid after he sees that his better off neighbor has just obtained a cow. When God asks the peasant, "How can I help you?" the peasant says, "Kill my neighbor's cow." I think it's perfectly describe what's happening between Ukraine and Russia, and just a mentality of Soviet people and the government of Russian country and people in charge. In my opinion, probably after the revolution in Ukraine, after Maidan's revolution, and after Ukraine was hoping to move towards West and towards Europe and fight corruption and obtain more freedom, Russian government become afraid of how our country will become better off financially, more freedom, people will live better, and then maybe people in Russia will see it as an example and think, oh, maybe we should overthrow our corrupt government so we can also live better like Ukraine, because we are really very similar, just how we look, how we talk, how we think, our background and past. And then it's just such a nonsense what Putin was making up to explain the war in Ukraine. One of the things is historical ties to Ukraine and how Ukraine should be a part of Russia. But Kiev was existing well before Moscow. So for like hundreds of years, Kiev was already a developed, established city, like the Slavic nation. That's where it came from, and Moscow was just like a forest. Just like nothing was there. The other reason was it's extremely funny: denazification. So Putin went to fight Nazis in Ukraine. And the first target, the number one target for Russian military was Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. For a minute, Vladimir Zelensky is Jew, and his grandfather was fighting in World War II, and he died protecting the country. And he's visiting all the Jew monuments regularly. So fighting Nazis in Ukraine and making a Jew president their first target was just like very stupid. And the second thing is they bombed Babin Yar. It's a graveyard of many Jews. It's probably the biggest graveyard for Jewish people. So Russian army also bombed this place. Another reason for starting war in Ukraine, or special operation, how they want to call it, was demilitarization. So Putin would tell those people, say, oh, we're only targeting military objects. And then we also pictures of dead children, bombed schools, bombed preschools, hospitals, maternity hospitals. And obviously there's no, our children are not part of the military. We don't have any, we don't produce any military equipment in kindergartens. So yeah, they'll keep making absurd things. And oh, I'm sorry.
You want to come over here, maybe? Come over a little bit closer.
Oh, I think it'll be too loud for you. I'll just try to speak louder.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So there was all these made-up things about why we have to start the war, and then Ukrainians were absolutely not expecting that actually happen, even though the whole world was warning us, because we actually indeed were like brothers and sisters, basically the same nation, same people. That unfortunately happened, and a lot of people were still, not leaving the country. So Ukrainians got a lot of help from West and from Europe. A lot of sanctions were imposed. And it was very interesting how Russian people reacted to their sanctions. So, for example, Kadyrov, he's a dictator in Chechnya. He decided to join, or he was called to join the fight in Ukraine. And so in response to European sanctions, the dictator of Chechnya, he made a post how he will impose sanctions against people from Europe. And then he said that he gives Europe time to change, to undo their sanctions and go away from helping Ukraine till February 31st. They're just like, how? It's just February 31st. So we just got, I think before the whole world wasn't able to see how incompetent and how corrupt and how stupid and still in the Soviet mentality the Russian government and people were. That was just one of the things. And there's millions of examples of their incompetence. My favorite one besides February 31st was how they imposed sanctions against Biden, but then they spelled his name wrong and they sanctioned his dead father. Oh my gosh, what's that? Why would you do that? Another thing is, Russia is second military power, and everybody was afraid, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? All these crazy weapons that they tell they have and they will use. And they actually spent $30 billion, I think, in the past couple of years after 2014 revolution in Ukraine to improve their military. At least Putin approved, and they supposedly spent it. So next thing you know, they came to Ukraine to fight, and they still use tanks that people stopped producing after World War II. So it's still Soviet Union tanks that Russian soldiers have to use. And their equipment is terrible. Their food for soldiers expired in 2015. You just open the box and say, oh, expired 2015, but they still give it to their kids to eat. So just like the corruption is crazy. But the guy is the chief of military. He had a $10 million mansion, and his daughter have like multi-billion businesses, and all his family is very rich. And this is just like crazy thing of the Soviet mindset, how you just steal money, steal money, steal money, and then they don't go to the bottom. And Putin is trying to keep his power by keeping the corruption, by making this corrupt system that allows him to stay in power. Is also the same system that can ruin him and puts him down, because if you spend $30 million on army and then you give them basically 1v1 million, is going after all of the corruption down. That's not going to do you any good. Another thing that made me sad and that I couldn't understand is how people don't value human life in Russia. And it's not that just don't value like Ukrainians' lives or people's life outside of the country. They don't value lives of their own people. So Russian government will pay families of Russian soldiers who died in Ukraine $123. That's all, just one payment. $123 is what they're going to get if their son, if their father, if their brother will die in war in Ukraine. And to buy food in Russia, you probably need from $200 to $300 a month. So it's less, it's like half of what you need for food per month they will give you. But it's still better than what you get in Chechnya. Kadyrov, the dictator in Chechnya, he gave families of dead Chechen soldiers a pound of potato, pound of onions, rice, and like very cheap box of pasta. That's what people get for fighting for their country, supposedly. And they basically don't value not only lives of other people, but lives of their own citizens. And another thing is, just recently, the area near Kiev, Bucha, and Irpin, Russian soldiers left the area, and our military went in, and they seen just terrible crimes that Russian military has done. And sorry. I just heard about this today, so it still makes me very sad, besides all of the other things. But I heard that my stepdad's best friend, he found that his father was dead. And he wasn't just dead, he was, are there many kids in the room? No, okay, they're not paying attention. Okay, so he wasn't just dead, he was tortured in a terrible way. And he was just a very old single man that living in his house and wasn't even resisting, but a couple of his fingers were cut off. Then one of his kidney were stabbed, and in the end it took off his scalp. Thank you. Sure. And then just left him die. So they tortured him alive and then just leave him die. And so my stepdad's best friend is going back to this place to have a funeral for his dad, or whatever's left from his dad. And there's a lot of terrible crimes like that happen, which they bombed Red Cross shelter for people with injuries, and it had a huge Red Cross sign on it. And then there was a house with 300 people hiding inside, and they also bombed it, and I think more than 100 people died. after this, somebody in interview was saying that like people were hiding in this house, but the place that was just taken under our control, it was the scariest place. They were trying to kill everybody from 16 to 60 or from 18 to 60. So any man that can fight or resist, they'll just shoot them. They'll tie their hands and just shoot them in the back of their head. So there's dead bodies all over the place. They would rape women, torture them and kill them after. They will take scalp out of people. They will lock people in the car and burn them alive. They will like drive in tanks all over people's bodies, and that's what we finding today. And yet it's still not the most scary thing that I saw or I heard about. The most scary about what they left in their town was dead bodies of their own soldiers on the streets, and they had control over this area, full control and no resistance almost, for about 3 weeks. And almost every single door in apartments was taken off, and almost every house was robbed, and a lot of things were taken out. So they had 3 weeks, and they used those 3 weeks to steal things from Ukrainians, but they didn't use like a single day to bury their own people from their own, their fellow soldiers. They just left them dying, because you can tell that bodies were there for a long time. So I just so speechless about how in this system and in this country and in their mindsets, they don't really have value of lives of other people, even their own, and they value money and financial possessions so much better, so much greater. And then going back to all the sanctions that were imposed and how people in Russia responded to them. So yeah, one of them, they were stealing, coming robbing in Ukraine while also fighting. We also have captured a lot of conversation between soldiers, where they will call their people back home in Russia. And their relatives will be like, oh yes, like kill more people, oh can you steal me this, can you steal me that? And what kind of a poverty or societies that must be, that they will come to fight to another country, risk their lives, kill people to like bring home. If you watched videos, they brought home like a car toy, just like a plastic car, which I bet you can buy it there, hopefully, and it's not expected. They will bring pans and pots, they will bring speakers, they will bring one funny thing, so they would bring a lot of they steal women's underwear, and apparently they will just bring this underwear to their girlfriends or their mothers. So they like open their cases that Russian left, when they were running away. So you didn't have like time to take everything. They were just like full of new women's underwear stealing from the stores. And when sanctions were imposed, which was supposedly make people in Russia think about rethinking their government and how they want to be received in international arena, I feel like the whole world was hoping for people to protest against their government and rethink the way their government do the things. But what we have in results, huge lines in IKEA, huge lines in Victoria's Secret. I feel like so many people were fighting for underwear. I don't know, it's really something with Russians and underwear. Then people would stock their fridges with cheeseburgers. Like you'll open it and it's like a full fridge of cheeseburgers. And then what else? They would just go try to take money off. Then people fight for sugar, people fight for oil in supermarkets. And they don't blame the government, they blame Europe, and they still, they blame Ukrainians, they blame Europe for everything that is happening. Also, they claim, again, Soviet mentality. Oh, we don't need West. We have everything here. We don't need all of your technology. So, McDonald's decided to leave Russia. Well, what Russia did is they rebranded McDonald's and made it Uncle Vanya. The only thing they did to rebrand is they make like letter M and they turn it around and then add one line, so it's like the first letter of uncle. And so they just nationalized McDonald's, and now they're going to make the same burgers and everything, but it's just now, as long as it doesn't call McDonald's, it means that we are, we don't need West. We have our own McDonald's. We don't need West. We just took your McDonald's and all your ID and all your equipment, but it's ours now. The same things they did, so they opened Russiagram, which is like Instagram, but their own version, and they think that as long as, it's just something similar, it will work. They also don't understand what it takes to have a business succeed, to compete, to have great ideas. They're just trying to copy everything that exists in West. At the same time, while they denying that West have any value that they can give to Russia. And this is the end of my presentation. Just today, one of the Russian commanders, he said that after months of fighting in Ukraine, Russian soldiers victoriously backing up while Ukrainian military is fearlessly, like when you have fear.
When you have fear?
Fearfully.
Fearfully.
So Russian soldiers victoriously backing away from Ukraine, and then Ukrainian military is fearfully advancing. Yes, and I was like, that's like a perfect summary of the war. Oh, sorry, my speech was all over the place, but I'm better in answering questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we will have opportunities
for question and answer, and thank you again for projecting, because I know that it's a little hard to hear outside here. Thank you very much.
My turn, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm not Russian, I'm not Ukrainian, I'm Serbian. So we are fellow Slavs. Let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm a local resident here. I came to Hawaii to play basketball, as Ken said, and I'm working for CVS, teach at UH. And Ken and I, we have this political discussion about international affairs all the time with a lunch, Today, when we talked about this event, Ken asked me if I can present the Russian side, which I think it's going to be quite interesting for you, because that's something that we don't hear in the mainstream media. So I think you'll be able to hear some things from that perspective. Frankly, Elizabeth, whenever we talk about Ukrainians and Russians or Belarus, to me it was all the same. Frankly, I didn't see any difference. They speak not the same language, but similar language. They practice same religion. And, there is a diversity, of course. It's a second largest country in Europe, right after Russia. Let me just move a little bit from this palm. And it has about 44 million people living there. So that's kind of like a size of Spain, I would say, almost like Italy. So it's quite a big country in Europe. But let me start my presentation. I'll go about 15 minutes so we can have a time for Q&A after. All right, I'm from Serbia, and Serbia knows war. Somehow Southeastern Europe has been this ancient place in Europe, and all these major powers around the world always like to put their feet over the Balkans. Somehow that leads, all roads from Central Europe to Middle East leads through Serbia and through that area. And as I said, we know war. So we have a saying, and I would like to say it at the very beginning. This is translation, so. In war, the politicians give ammunition. The rich give the food, and the poor give their children. When the war is over, the politicians get back the leftover ammunition, the rich grow more food, and the poor search for the graves of their children. We just had a war, 8-year-old war during the disintegration of former Yugoslavia. And then we experienced bombing 3 months, and I'm going to be telling you about it. And we have a frozen conflict in a country right now that's been already for 20-something years. So we know war, and I'll tell you from experience, Putin and Zelensky and all these oligarchs on both sides, they'll find a way out to be either more powerful, more successful, or more rich. But you know who's going to pay the price? Those 4 million Ukrainian refugees right now. Some of them are in Serbia. They're going to have a hole in their heart till the rest of their lives. And I know Lee knows what I'm talking about. And the parents on both sides going to go to find the graves or the young soldiers who were dying in a senseless war that was totally avoidable. Ukrainians and Russians have the same root. Root is in Kiev, in Ukraine. They call themselves Kievan Rus. When Mongols burned the whole thing to the ground, Russians moved, some of those tribes, Slavic, moved to the north, to those forests that she was telling you about, and that became Russia. Who stayed became Ukrainian. But they're brothers. And they lived side by side, intermarried. Even some of the greatest Russians that we know as the Russians, they have a Ukrainian blood. For example, Solzhenitsyn. You probably know Solzhenitsyn, right? Okay, let me go back to Serbia because that's very important intro to what I'm going to tell you later on about Russian perspective. In 1999, my country was bombed for 3 months, relentlessly, to be exact, 78 days. Sorties were flying day and night, in the morning, in the evening. Kids went to school under bombs. Our best tennis player, who was a kid at that time, Novak Djokovic, he was practicing under bombs for 3 months. There was no bridge, major bridge in a country that was not destroyed. I think they only saved those Belgrade bridge, but all other cities' bridge were destroyed. Infrastructure, railway tracks, highways, main roads, military infrastructure was put in a stone age. There was no a single factory that produced any kind of machines that was not destroyed. Petrochemical factory destroyed. Those who bombed, they throw the graphite bombs, so the entire electrical grid in the country was destroyed. My parents literally for 3 months lived under the candles. Radio television of Belgrade with the 19 journalists was purposely targeted. They were killed and it was destroyed. Chinese embassy in Serbia, oh, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. They say it was a mistake. It was destroyed. And it was not done by Russians. No, it was done by NATO. It was done by United States of America. 78 days. Why? Because NATO was saying that Serbs were about to commit the genocide against the minority group in the country. Even though it didn't happen, but they made assumption due to the wars that were existing in the Balkans prior to that. Then Serbia was invaded, occupied. A southern province called Kosovo that we consider to be our Jerusalem was occupied. And bottom line, now one of the largest military bases, NATO military bases in Europe is in that province because puppet government was formed, and for us it's a frozen conflict. Was international law on our side? Well, let me tell you, there was no UN Security Council decision to invade Serbia. Even not all European members were in sync with that decision. The Helsinki Protocol that guarantees the borders in Europe from 1976 was on our side. Our constitution and sovereignty over that region, it's been in place since 1912. But still, we were bombed, invaded, and there's a puppet government placed over there. And yes, NATO has 16,000 soldiers with a modern equipment and modern military in the area. All right. So the reason why I'm saying is this. When our government, since I'm American citizen and Serbian citizen, when our government here tells us now, tells actually to Russians, you can't invade the country, you know what's Russian response to that? Do you remember Serbia in 1999? When they said you can't form the puppet governments in eastern part of Ukraine and have them independent or annex Crimea, you know what they say? Do you remember Serbia in 1999? All right. there are four things from a Russian perspective to understand, and I'm going to read. I'm going to be not going into deeper into everyday life because war is brutal, right? So Elizabeth already said very graphically what's going on there. But there are four things that I'd like to discuss in my 9 more minutes. The first, the key to understand what's going on over there is the NATO expansion towards Moscow. Okay, that's the key. That's in essence what the problem is right now. The second, I think, very important topic is the containment of the Russian development. Okay, so I'll talk about that. The third one, Russians feel that the war did not start on February 22nd of this year when the Russian military just went to Ukraine. They think the war started actually in 2014 when the elected government in Kiev, the president, was taken down in a coup. As that's the perception from Russia. We know it as a Euromaidan revolution. They think it's a coup. And the fourth thing, she mentioned about Nazification or denazification of Ukraine. I think it's very important to talk about it because from Russian perspective, that's something that they pointed out as one of the key reasons why they're there. So I think we can talk about it in a Q&A session, and I welcome your comments and questions. So let me go one by one. All right, in the essence of the problem, in the essence of the war in Ukraine, is the NATO expansion towards Moscow. Briefly, through history, in 1989, probably you already know, James Baker, Foreign Secretary to the Ronald Reagan administration, late 80s, end of the Cold War, he has promised that if Soviet Union, Russia, pulls out of Germany and allows peaceful reunification of Germany, because Germany was split in East and West, for those of you who know Cold War, right? If they allow peaceful reunification of Germany, that there would be no an inch forward, meaning NATO would not expand an inch towards Moscow. Well, we know now where NATO is, right? There were 3 expansions. In 1996, there was the first one. Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary were incorporated in NATO. Then there was a second wave of, I think, Romania, Bulgaria, Baltic states. And then there was a third one, right? Then in 2006, on a NATO summit in Bucharest, in Romania, NATO invited Georgia and Ukraine in its membership. Okay? 6 months after, on OSCE, that's the European security body for the all European nation, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, went in and he said, these are his words. I remember them when I was getting ready. I went through all these YouTube videos, read something. He said that for Russia, expansion of NATO in Georgia and in Ukraine is considered as, these are his words, existential threat to Russia. Okay? So let me tell you what it means from our point of view. You know what's the Monroe Doctrine in the United States, right? No foreign troops. Okay, he forgot. He knows that for sure, yeah. No foreign troops are allowed in North America. So in this continent, in Caribbeans, Central America, foreign troops are not going to be tolerated. To put you in the shoes how Russians feel, let me just give you, this is hypothetical. Let's say China is about, probably in 20, 30, 40 years from now, they're going to have the biggest economy in the world. They have 1.4 billion. That's more than Russia, Europe, United States, and Mexico combined, okay? So their economy is growing 8% a year over year, 10%. So eventually they're going to be strong and powerful. So let's say 50 years from now, CCP, Chinese Communist Party, infiltrate Mexico by giving them cheap loans. And we all want money, right? I know Serbian government, they love it. They go to IMF, they get cheap loans, so they stay in power for a long period of time, the Serbian government. So let's say Mexico takes those loans and start playing favor for favor. And then suddenly China infiltrates Mexico army and says, you know what, how about we are now brothers, we will give you a lot of money. Let's put our military infrastructure in Mexico. And then one day we wake up and Chinese military, 50 years from now, is in Gulf of Mexico on Rio Grande River. Would we tolerate that? When President Biden says this was unprovoked, I just gave you hypothetically. Would you think that's unprovoked? We know in 1962 what the President Kennedy was ready to do, right? When Soviet Union wanted to put their military infrastructure in Cuba. We wanted to go to the World War III if it's necessary, but we would not allow Soviet Union enemy military infrastructure just off the on the coast of Miami, right? So that's how Russians think. Just 2 years ago, on a NATO summit, NATO declared that instead of having axis of evil, which used to be North Korea, Iran, and other countries, now it's Russia. Russia is the #1 enemy. 2 years ago, officially NATO statement is that Russia is the enemy. Okay. Do Russians hate Ukrainians? No. Do Russians hate Georgians? No. There's no ethnic strife. As I said, they were neighbors. They lived side by side or together for centuries. But both countries, Georgia and Ukraine, are strategically located, and Russia feels they need to, if there is a war, if NATO is about to invade Russia, they have nowhere else to go. Behind them is Russia. So let's have a war in Ukraine. If they have to fight it, let's fight it on that soil. That's how they think. From city of Kharkov in Ukraine to Moscow, there's a 300 miles. If you put 10,000 tanks in city of Kharkov, they can make it to Moscow within a day. If you put military infrastructure with the Pershing rockets, mid-range, they can reach Moscow from Ukraine between 5 to 10 minutes. So I just gave you the feel how probably the Russian government is briefed by their military right now. Okay, about NATO expansion. I think it's horrible policy to have expansion in that way so that the other side is threatened, especially nuclear power, can do a lot of damage. And that's not just my opinion. If you look at some of the top US diplomats, they were already advising the former presidents not to expand, especially without taking in consideration Russian demands. Since Gorbachev over Yeltsin and now Putin, they wanted to have a comprehensive military agreement for the entire Europe. All those requests, NATO just brushed them off. All right, so that's the first thing. The second one was about containment of the Russian growth. 1990s was probably one of the most difficult time in Russian history. After the transition from the Soviet Union into Russia was so difficult for people, not just in Russia itself, but all over Soviet Union. If you've been to Russia that time, you'll know there's a lot of crime. You could be kidnapped, right? The oligarchs, just a few people, control the resources and money and wealth of the country that has 150 million people, right? People were depressed. They drink heavily. The demographics have sharply dropped. The Russian men in the 90s live at average 59 years. That was it, 59. People work for $50, $100 a month. It was quite a bad time, horrible time for Russia. I mean, how bad it was is that Chechnya was infiltrated by the Islamic radicals, and the army was in such a disarray that they could not even control the small province with 300,000 people. Okay? So things changed after 2000s. What Putin have done, I think he did good for Russia, meaning that he stabilized the country, he uprooted crime. The oligarchs, he put them together. Some of them rebelled and says, you're not going to control me, so now they are in London or somewhere else, right? But those who stayed, they kind of cooperate in a big system that we know as being Russia. And our expectation that Russia is going to be a democratic country after Soviet Union experience, after experience with czars for hundreds of years, it's just not realistic. It's never going to be liberal democracy. Russia is going to be Russia. And the system that they have will be uniquely Russian. That's how I feel. But crime was uprooted. Economically, they established quite a good relationship, especially with some European countries, like, for example, Germany, Italy, France. Foreign investments pour in, and slowly they start exploiting their resources, which is oil and gas, grain, and artificial fertilizer. Those are like big exporting goods for Russia. So things turn around. They were able to control the federation right now. They improved socially, economically, and Russia just moved on to be, a decent country to live. I've been to Russia twice. I used to work for Microsoft back in Belgrade. We had some training in Russia. I know that sales of software was like through the roof in Russia. I mean, Microsoft software in Russia. So we went for some trainings over there. I mean, that they're economically stable and strong tells you just that they organized the Winter Olympic Games. They built the entire new city in Sochi, and they organized the World Cup in soccer just 4 years ago, which is also one of the largest events. However, what's very important is that if we don't know the history and all these people who pull the strings on the side and some blueprints that exist in diplomacy, we can't comprehend all the way what's really going on. So that's why I brought you some resource. If you ever want to go and read, it's a great resource. It's related to what I was saying. Russian economic growth was mostly due very good relationship that Russia had with Germany, in particular Germany. Why? Because it seems two countries are very complementary. What Germany needs, Russia has, and what Russia needs, Germany has, so they work together, Plus Putin was a KGB guy in Germany. He speaks fluent German, so probably he was able to relate really well with Germans. Don't forget that former Chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schroeder, he was one of the top executives for Gazprom, which is the largest oil and gas company in Russia. Still is, yeah. But yes, they were able, due to this relationship, to establish a good relationship with Germany. If you read the book of Zbigniew Brzezinski, I'm sure you know who Zbigniew Brzezinski, most of you know, but one of the popular American diplomats, he passed away a couple of years ago. He's the mastermind behind supporting the Taliban and Osama bin Laden during the first Afghanistani war in the 1980s. So that's Zbigniew Brzezinski. But he, in this book that I read many years ago, by the way, it was published in 2001, he says that NATO, in a way, was created to keep the Russia out, to keep the Germans down, and to have Americans in Europe. Okay? He says in this is that to have Russia as a superpower, they would need to have, besides the territory and resources they have, they need to have Ukraine on their side. And if they unify with Germany, that would be very dangerous for the interest, and he's talking from American point of view, that would be very dangerous for American point of view, for American interest in Europe. So we should do everything we can not to allow that unification to happen. So that's kind of a playbook that tells us right now, like, we as a NATO, we keep Ukraine out of the Russian influence. We have the war in Ukraine, Europeans homogenized, and then we push Russia away. Look, President of Russia in 2007 have said that NATO in Ukraine and Georgia is the existential threat. So for 15 years, we know the Russian red lines. We know exactly how they react. They reacted in that way in Georgia. We just pushed them in Ukraine, and we have this invasion. All right, so that's the second point. I'm already over time. Okay, the last point I'll make, and we can talk about denazification in a Q&A. For Russians, war in Ukraine did not start on February 22nd. For Russians, war started when the Viktor Yanukovych, legally elected president of Ukraine, a Ukrainian now, when he was taken out of the office and out of the power, what we know as Euromaidan revolution. Well, Russians think that was a coup. It was staged by the CIA and by the Ukrainian nationalists. The legally elected president is no longer there, which was breach of the Ukrainian law. When those who elected Viktor Yanukovych, the former president of Ukraine, when they rebelled, and those were the ones in the south and in the east, because they voted for him, Ukrainian army was sent to take care of the rebels, right? With force. There was no negotiation. It was a force. In city of Odessa, 60 people were burned alive in municipality building over there. 60 people. And then the war started in the east. Russia annexed Crimea because that's strategically very important to them, and they supported the rebels with the arms. The war was bloody. It was fought for a few years. Ukrainian army lost. They signed the Minsk Protocol, which is broken down. I think Germany and France were the one who laid out this Minsk Protocol, kind of peace agreement, which hasn't been implemented. Ukraine wanted to retake those territories with force. They were slowly arming. And when Ukraine decided to become a part of NATO, those who were anti-NATO within Ukraine, plus Russia, they decided on February 22nd to invade the country. And how I see the war right now is that Russia wants to take off the entire area that they see it's a pro-Russian in Ukraine. They don't care for Kiev, they don't care for western part and central part of the country. They want the eastern and southern part, and that's what they're about to control. There is a thing about denazification and the whole thing, but I'm thinking like I'm already over time. So Ken, please.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Miko. I thought maybe I'd just allow Elizabeth to make a comment and then we'll open up to Q&A, okay? And if you would just raise your hand and I'll call on you. So, Elizabeth, did you have something
yeah.
you wanted to say?
I just remembered one more thing for my point about corruption and how they invested so much money into fighting Ukraine and overthrowing the government there, or taking it under their control again. But one of the things about having pro-Russians people in Ukraine, so they send like pro-Russian people or hired people in Ukraine that were in government position and helped them get higher. They paid them $2 million, so they set up this pro-Russian protest and they set up this pro-Russian agenda, so that when Russian soldiers come into, like Putin said in his first speech, and how he probably expected that people will meet him like with flowers and they're like, oh, our saviors, yay! And so that was their job, and they get a lot of money paid for it. Later on, they were arrested, and it was found out they did nothing. The corruption is the system that Putin is enforces or keeps alive corruption. It kicked his, he kicked him back, because basically those people just took his money and like, you know what, we just do nothing. But they stayed in Ukraine and tried to set up the pro-Russian groups and all the system. And the last comment I wanted to make is, unlike Belarus, and how, from my experience, people there are actually don't have the sense of nationalism and desire to fight against Russia, and how terrible they live there, being a part of, our big Russian brother Russia, or big Russia country. When they attack Ukraine, Ukrainians become unified and pro-Western and against corruption like never before. We passed a lot of laws. We just cleaned our government already from so many corrupted people, from so many corrupted Ukrainian oligarchs. So trying to make Ukrainian weaker, they actually made it a lot stronger and a lot more against them. I don't know what plan, definitely not the plan they had, but it worked in a favor of Ukrainians and Americans and Europeans.
Thank you. Now,
Yeah, that's-
I'm guessing that there are a number of people who have thoughts or questions or comments. Please raise your hand and I'll call on you. And gee, this is like my class. What are you doing?
How many people?
Okay, Sean.
I have a question for
me?
Michelle.
You?
Oh.
I thought it was nobody asking question. I was just going to make a comment. I was in Russia in 1993. Exactly what you said. People were drinking and drunk early in the morning. They were so depressed. I've never seen it so depressed.
Huh.
Yeah, and $1. The day I arrived, $1 exchanged 820 rubles. 5 days later, when I left, $1 exchanged 1,200 rubles, and the salary for the people was 500 rubles. So I don't even know how to calculate how to pay for things. It was so
Hourly
pathetic.
wage? Hourly wage?
No, monthly.
Monthly wage.
My goodness.
Yeah, my friends were getting paid
Yeah.
$50 a month in Lithuania.
Yeah.
Okay, Sean had his hand up, and then Steve, and then Janet. Okay.
Yeah, I recently got to talk to someone who has Serbian descent, and he told me the same thing as you. So that was yeah, it was pretty uncanny to like see you talk about the same thing. He was talking about how the Serbians were actually like strong allies with the United States back in World War II. He was talking about there was this operation that the Serbians carried out that they rescued 500 U.S. airmen or something like that, and which nobody apparently talks about anymore. So, you know, they had a strong partnership. They were strong allies. So I guess my question is like, what the hell? Like, why would the United States bomb them? Did they just forget about that, or?
Yeah, that's a good. I think Serbia and United States, the only in the 90s, they were not on the same side. Yeah, and he's referring to one of the biggest rescue missions during the World War II. Serbian villagers, pretty much, and Serbian Royalist Army have saved 508 American soldiers who were flying to Ploiești in Romania. That's where the oil fields are for Hitler during the World War II. They were bombed, but then Germans had a strong air defense, right? So they would take down all those planes, and then usually they would fall into Serbia, you know, when they were trying to go back to Sicily or Italy, right? So yeah, during the World War II, allies, absolutely. And World War I, same thing. I think Serbia is one of the rare countries whose flag was flying over the White House. Roosevelt, due to the close relationship with some of the Serbian diplomats, he allowed that to fly. But the thing is that we had a politician in 1990s who was a hardcore communist, and he did not want to play the game as it was requested by NATO, and that was it. So.
Steve.
I'm just curious whether you have any thoughts on the timing with the changeover in President Trump and President Biden. In academia, I hear both points of view, mostly left-wing, and my friends text and say that President Trump's antics empowered Putin to behave similarly. And then, of course, I try to read other sources that say, well, with our current administration, that seems to be more concerned with, well, we won't even get into that. But could it be? Do you think there's a timing there? I mean, I keep thinking that Trump would talk to Putin and say, come on, man, like, what are you doing? I mean,
just
maybe that's too simple, but...
maybe too complicated. But what people think in Ukraine and what I hear in our news is that they do blame United States for not helping enough, and we had this thing saying how Russia definitely used the weak president of United States. They're like, oh, United States president elected president is so weak, so that's how they time it to attack. And also, maybe it's not related to president, but after coronavirus and then after potential recessions and economic troubles, it was just not just a president, in my opinion.
It is really hard to make assumption, what would be if the other administration is there, etc. But one thing is for sure, on the Democratic side, all their representatives, diplomatic representatives, they're huge anti-Russian. They Russophobes, big time. And I'll tell you, for example, Zbigniew Brzezinski, he is one of those who are very anti-Russian. He handpicked Madeleine Albright, by the way, huge anti-Russian, right? Then Kagan, he is professor, I think, at Yale, and he is Victoria Nuland's husband. Huge anti-Russian. So I'm sure when those people get together, there's nothing positive to say about Russia, and they're going to go that way much easier than the other side. That's my opinion.
Oh, however, there's one thing, I think I shared with Ken, but I saw on Instagram so on Instagram, there's Instagram for president, right? For American president. And then they make an announcement how, because we're helping Ukrainian people and imposing all these sanctions, just prepare because our economy would take a major hit. And I was like, because of sanctions, your economy will take a major hit? Oh, because of your governance, that's just one thing that I can for sure tell effects that I didn't like, and they definitely abuse situation for their benefit. Covers their tail.
Okay, from a human perspective, are there any of these aids that we are sending or the world is sending, are they reaching Ukraine?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of aid reaching Ukraine, and my friends who are helping around in towns, they are seeing all this aid. And Moro, you'll be so happy. So through Ken, I met Naomi, and her parents are fighting for human rights in Norway, and she reached out to me, and I connected my HPU classmate with my high school classmate, and now she helps my classmate in Ukraine with money, and my classmate, she's helping kids from orphanages from all the areas to escape to outside countries. So because of first school and all these connections, there's a lot of help coming in.
Okay, so the second part of this question is, what can we do as people not trying to fight a war, help?
Oh, that's a good question. Donating only to the Ukrainian government post sources, because money really help. We have military, and then we have territory defense, and most of Ukrainian military is territory defense. So it's just an average man, half of you here that just oh, I'll take a gun, oh, I'll take a knife, whatever I have to protect our country. I will take a tractor and I'll tow a tank. So people just do fight. So
I wondered the same thing as far as helping. CNN has collected about $7 million in viewers. If you go to their website, a whole variety of things you could support.
I'll be happy to send you the link.
Went there from United States, and they're from Poland to Ukraine, and they were just trafficking supplies daily, and so I would think just directly donate supplies to them. That's another way.
There's a fun story about supplies. So people who collect supplies, they make a lot of comments about what was brought to this donation center. So donation for Solidars, they were what is it called? Waitress, cute waitress outfit, and then they have stockings, and then they had used socks and bears. And those people just what are they donating? So. And then the other thing is, if you even donate ammunition, it's not always the right one, so better help money. And one last story. There was a Russian woman in Italy, and in donation processing center, because we speak the same language, right? Russian, if Russians speak Russian and Ukrainians speak Russian, we can think they're Ukrainians. So she got into donation center, and she said she will drive to Poland. And she actually took all the donations, take it for herself, and then was second market selling it. So they caught her. But I was And it's not, yeah, just how bad can you be?
If I may add about, I would recommend you to give to the Red Cross. It's a very credible organization, and they will find the right people to receive that aid that you are giving. I would never give to Ukrainian government, Russian, especially not the Serbian government, any money, okay? But I would give it to Red Cross.
Oh, I will not give it to Red Cross.
Elizabeth, I have to tell you, you mentioned the food, the Russian military in China, this viral TikTok. They were bragging about, look, the Russian military, look how well they are equipped, how well they are fed. Their food, they can even heat it up. They have the TikTok, and showing how they can fold it into a burner and how they heat up their potatoes. And the Chinese are the ones are pro-Russia, and the most common, most popular Chinese, not Twitter, but Chinese thing yesterday was the Russians justifiably invaded Ukraine. Ukrainians unjustifiably defending their own nation. The evil hand behind all this is United States. That's the Chinese mentality right now, and went viral.
This might be a good time for dessert. Is that
Yeah.
Okay,
We have
so
dessert.
thank
And
you
please talk to them. Don't let them eat.
very, very nice.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, we went to the Chinese embassy. The bomb was still there, and Michelle and I was taking pictures. Suddenly, came out from nowhere, these people were stop. Don't do that. And,
Pictures of the bombing.
in Serbia, because the U.S. dropped the bomb in Chinese embassy. It didn't explode. So China was bragging about, now we have your bomb. We can ship to China and see how you make it.
But it didn't work, so what?
That's right. Yeah. Special one they put there.